A ruthless man-hunting game targeted Officer Rachel, but her police canine dog had other plans. When a secret underground network begins abducting victims for a twisted sport, Officer Rachel Lawson stumbles too close to the truth but becomes the next target. Trapped and outnumbered, she fights to survive while her loyal canine partner, Ghost, tracks her captors through the shadows. As Ghost uncovers a trail of chilling evidence, Rachel realizes the mastermind behind it all is someone she once trusted. But time is running out, and the final hunt has begun. Can Ghost and Cole Maddox stop the killers before Rachel becomes their next trophy? The silence of the night shattered in an instant. A sharp gasp tore through the darkness, followed by the rustling of hurried steps on rough pavement. A woman, clutching her side, stumbled into the glow of a flickering street lamp. Her breath came in quick bursts as she pressed against the nearest wall, forcing herself to listen. Nothing. No footsteps. No heavy breathing. No sign of the figure who had attacked her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, but before she could unlock it, something shifted in the shadows. She barely had time to react before a presence loomed nearby. A gloved hand reached for her again, but she threw herself backward, falling hard onto the pavement. A siren wailed in the distance. The attacker hesitated for only a second, then melted into the night, vanishing before the flashing lights rounded the corner. Officer Rachel Lawson arrived moments later. The woman was injured but conscious. Her hands shook as she gripped Rachel's wrist. He didn't make a sound," she whispered. "He was just there." Rachel exchanged a look with her partner, canine handler Cole Maddox, who stood nearby with his dog, Ghost. The German Shepherd sat alert, eyes scanning the area. No footprints. No dropped weapon, no sign of struggle beyond the woman's torn sleeve and the fear in her eyes. By morning, news of the attack spread like wildfire. People whispered in grocery stores, glanced over their shoulders in parking lots. Fear took root fast. Then it happened again. The second victim had the same story, caught off guard, no clear description of the attacker. The only certainty was that he never hesitated and never left a trace. Local law enforcement was running in circles. No fingerprints, no surveillance footage, nothing to explain how he appeared and disappeared so effortlessly. Rachel studied the map in the station, connecting the locations with red markers. 3 attacks in 5 days. "This guy isn't slowing down," she muttered. Cole crossed his arms. "And no one seen his face?" Rachel shook her head. Not even a blurry glimpse. Ghost let out a low sound, ears perked toward the door. A new call had just come in. Another attack. This time, it was worse. By the time they reached the scene, the victim was unconscious, her wrist twisted at an odd angle. A thin trail of blood marked where she had crawled to safety. Ghost pulled against his lead, nose to the ground. Rachel followed as the dog led them down a side alley. Ghost's behavior had changed, focused, relentless. He wasn't just tracking. He had found something. Cole barely had time to react before Ghost lunged toward a nearby fence, barking fiercely. Rachel swung her flashlight toward the rusted metal. Just beyond it, footprints pressed into the dirt, deep and fresh. They weren't alone. Cole's grip on Ghost's lead tightened as the dog let out a low, warning growl. The footprints were fresh, pressed deep into the dirt, as if someone had stood there just moments ago. Rachel stepped closer, her flashlight casting long beams through the gaps in the fence. Beyond it, the ground sloped downward into overgrown terrain. Ghost's nose worked fast, his focus locked onto the trail. Without hesitation, Cole gave him the command, and the dog took off, leading them past the fence and onto the rough path beyond. They followed, weaving through the deserted streets as the scent trail twisted and turned before suddenly, nothing. Ghost circled, sniffing furiously, but the trail had stopped cold. Cole knelt beside him, scanning the area. No sign of movement, no sound, no clear exit. Rachel turned toward the abandoned house in front of them. The place was untouched, windows boarded up, door locked, not a single disturbance. But something felt off. No forced entry, no signs of anyone leaving, she said, stepping back. How does someone just disappear? Cole shook his head. They don't. Back at the station, Rachel spread the case files across her desk, searching for connections. The attacks were random, yet they all circled back to one thing: the outskirts of town, near the old industrial district. No one went there after dark. She and Cole weren't the only ones starting to see the pattern. A man waited outside the station that morning, shifting from foot to foot. His clothes were worn, his hands clenched tight around a stained hat. "You're looking in the wrong places," he muttered when Rachel approached. She studied him. "What do you mean?" His fingers twitched. "The man in the shadows. He's there, always watching, but you don't see him. Not until it's too late." Rachel frowned. "Who is he?" The man's expression darkened. "He takes. That's all he does." Before she could ask more, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded street. Cole and Ghost arrived minutes later, the handler shaking his head. "That guy say anything useful?" Rachel glanced back toward where the man had been. "Depends on what you call useful." Before they could discuss further, another voice cut in. "Chasing ghost stories now, Maddox?" Mark Calloway leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. His badge shone under the station lights, but the smirk on his face didn't reach his eyes. "You really think some invisible attacker is running circles around us?" Calloway scoffed. "No prints, no evidence, no face. Sounds like a whole lot of nothing." Rachel exhaled sharply. "Tell that to the victims." Calloway waved a hand. "The town's paranoid, always looking for something to fear." He looked at Cole. "And you? Still letting a dog do your job?" Cole's jaw twitched, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he gave Ghost a quiet command. The German Shepherd turned away, uninterested. "We'll keep following the leads," Cole said. "Good luck with that," Calloway muttered, walking off. Hours later, another call came in. This time, it was different. Cole and Rachel arrived at the scene, a house near the last attack. Ghost's body tensed the moment they stepped inside. His nose twitched, his muscles stiff. Then, without warning, he barked. Not just once. Over and over, deep, urgent, locked onto something in the air. Cole knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "What is it, boy?" Ghost pressed his nose to the floor, then lifted his head again. The same scent. The same one from before. But now, Cole knew where he'd smelled it. An old case, a case where people didn't just get attacked. They disappeared. Cole's throat tightened. Rachel. This scent. She was already moving, flipping through files. Her hands stilled when she reached an old police report. Years ago, several people vanished without explanation. No bodies, no suspects. The case went cold. Now it was happening again. Determined, Rachel traced every detail back to one place, the industrial district. But the records didn't just show old buildings. They showed something underneath. Cole tapped the map. "Look at these tunnels. They run past the old factories, into the woods. We never checked them." Rachel grabbed her keys. "Then let's check them now." The two drove for miles, following the outskirts of town until the streetlights disappeared behind them. Ghost sat alert in the back seat, watching the road. When they reached the woods, the air turned thick with silence. Cole led the way, Ghost pulling ahead, nose low. The entrance to the tunnels was barely visible, a rusted door half buried in vines. Ghost sniffed at the edges. Then he did something he never did. He refused to move forward. Cole frowned. "Ghost?" The dog's ears flattened, his tail lowered. Rachel stepped closer, pressing her hand against the door. It wasn't locked. She pulled it open. The tunnel stretched into darkness, its walls lined with strange carvings. Torn clothes lay scattered near the entrance. Metal cages stood along the sides. Someone had been here recently. Then, from deeper inside, a faint sound. A woman, barely able to speak, lay curled in the shadows. Rachel rushed forward, her voice steady but urgent. "We've got you." The woman's lips moved, forming a single word before she lost consciousness. Rachel's stomach dropped. Calloway. The next morning, Officer Mark Calloway was gone. His home was a wreck, drawers yanked open, papers covering the floor. His gun and badge lay abandoned on the table. Rachel stared at the mess in Calloway's house, her stomach twisting. Nothing was stolen. No forced entry. Just chaos, papers thrown around, furniture overturned, a half-drunk coffee still sitting on the counter. Cole stood near the door, scanning the room. Ghost sniffed along the floor, weaving between the furniture before stopping at the kitchen entrance. His body tensed, nose pressed to a single boot print near the back door. Cole's jaw clenched. Whoever took Calloway wasn't in a hurry. Rachel rubbed her temple. They weren't worried about being caught. Before they could process what it meant, Rachel's phone vibrated. She's awake. The survivor from the tunnels was ready to talk. At the hospital, the woman sat propped up, eyes darting between Rachel and Cole as they entered. Her face was pale, her hands tied around the thin blanket draped over her legs. Rachel spoke gently. "We need to know what you saw." The woman swallowed hard. "It wasn't just one man," she whispered. "There were several." Cole's fingers tightened on his notepad. "One of them," she continued, "had a police badge." Rachel and Cole exchanged looks. The woman clenched the blanket tighter. They weren't just taking people. They were watching them first. Rachel pulled up a chair. "What do you mean?" "They knew exactly where to find us." Her voice cracked. "We weren't random. They chose us." Rachel's mind raced. "Did you hear any names?" The woman shook her head. "They never spoke to each other. Only to him." "Who?" Cole pressed. She hesitated. Then, in a near whisper, "The one with the badge." Back at the station, Rachel dove into the reports. Dozens of complaints, missing items, noises outside windows, doors found unlocked in the morning, small things that were brushed off. Every single one came from a victim before they were attacked. Cole exhaled sharply. They were testing them. Rachel's face darkened. And no one believed them. A bark suddenly broke the silence. Ghost shot forward, pulling toward the far end of the room. Cole barely had time to react before the dog bolted for the basement stairs. Rachel hurried after them as Ghost pawed at a rusted metal grate near the floor. Cole crouched, running his hands along the edges. It wasn't just a vent. It was a hidden passage. With a grunt, he pried the grate loose. A tunnel stretched below, narrow, leading into the earth. Rachel grabbed her flashlight. "How deep does this go?" Cole gave Ghost a command. The German Shepherd leaped down first, sniffing the ground as he moved forward. Cole followed, Rachel right behind him. The air turned stale. The passage sloped downward, opening into a wide stone chamber. At the far end, an iron door stood locked. Cole pressed his ear to the surface. Rachel tested the handle. "This hasn't been used in years." Ghost whined, shifting on his paws. His tail was stiff, ears pinned forward. Rachel turned to Cole. "We're about to find out what they've been hiding." With a solid kick, the rusted lock gave way. Inside, the room was lined with metal filing cabinets, old desks, and boxes stacked haphazardly. But what made Rachel's stomach turn were the photographs pinned to the wall. Women, taken from a distance, in parking lots, through their apartment windows. Some circled in red. Cole's voice was tight. They were watching them for months. Rachel flipped open one of the files. Inside, typed notes, detailed habits, schedules, addresses. She pulled another, same thing. And another. "This is a hunting ground," Cole muttered. Rachel's hands shook as she pulled out a stack of surveillance footage. The dates spanned years, and then she saw it. A blurred image of Calloway. Rachel's stomach dropped. Before she could process it, a metallic click rang out behind them. Cole shoved her down as the first shot blasted through the air. Sparks exploded off the metal shelves. Rachel scrambled behind a desk, hard hammering as another shot tore through a stack of papers. Ghost growled, muscles tensed, ready to launch. Cole yanked his gun from his holster. "Move!" Rachel shoved a cabinet over, sending a wall of files crashing down between them and the shooter. Gunfire cracked again, ricocheting off the stone walls. They couldn't see who was firing. Rachel reached for her radio. "Officer down, shots fired at." The radio snapped from her grip. A boot crushed it against the floor. Before she could react, a hand yanked her back. She swung her elbow, catching her attacker across the jaw. Cole fired a warning shot into the darkness, forcing the hidden figures back. Rachel hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. Footsteps rushed away, then silence. Cole reached for her. "Are you hit?" She shook her head. Ghost let out a sharp bark. They weren't alone. Cole gripped his weapon. "They wanted us dead before we could expose this." Rachel pushed herself up, eyes locked on the wall of photographs. They failed. Cole exhaled sharply, gripping his weapon tighter. The tunnel was silent now, but that didn't mean they were safe. He moved carefully, scanning the room. Ghost's fur bristled as he stepped forward, nose twitching toward the hallway leading deeper underground. Rachel wiped a trickle of blood from her temple. "They didn't finish the job, but they'll be back." Before Cole could answer, Ghost let out a sharp bark and took off. "Ghost, wait!" Cole bolted after him. Rachel spun toward the exit, ready to follow, when a force slammed into her side. The tunnel blurred as she was yanked backward. A rough grip crushed against her arm, dragging her through an unseen doorway before it slammed shut. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was Cole vanishing around the corner, chasing after Ghost. Cole barely caught up with the dog before he realized Rachel was no longer behind him. His breath came hard as he turned in every direction. The tunnel had split into two paths. Ghost sniffed frantically at the ground before looking back at him. Cole's stomach twisted. "Find her." Ghost bolted again, leading him through the winding tunnels until they broke into the woods outside. It was then that he saw it. A smear of blood across the damp ground. The trail led into the trees, toward an abandoned hunting lodge. Cole raised his gun, moving in. Ghost stayed low, sniffing the air as they stepped inside. The lodge smelled of rot and dust, the wooden floors groaning beneath their weight. Then, movement. Cole spun, gun raised, only to freeze at the sight before him. Mark Calloway. The officer lay slumped against the wall, barely breathing, his skin ashen. Blood soaked his torn shirt. Cole dropped to a knee beside him. "Who did this?" Calloway coughed, pain twisting his face. "It's bigger than you think." Cole gritted his teeth. "Who's behind it?" A weak breath. "Chief Aldridge." Cole's body went rigid. Mark's hand clawed weakly at Cole's wrist. "It's not just him." He gasped for air. "They watch. They hunt. For sport." A shudder passed through his body. His eyes drifted shut. He never took another breath. Cole clenched his jaw. Calloway had been part of it, but in the end, he'd been nothing more than a pawn. Ghost let out a sharp growl, pulling Cole from his thoughts. The dog had locked onto another scent. Rachel. Without another second wasted, Cole sprinted after him. Rachel's head throbbed as she fought to stay conscious. She was strapped to a chair, thick ropes cutting into her wrists. The dim glow of monitors flickered before her. Security feeds. The faces of terrified women filled the screens. A voice cut through the silence. "You should have stopped digging, Rachel." Chief Preston Aldridge stepped into view. His uniform was crisp, his posture calm, like this was just another day at the office. Rachel forced a glare. "You're not getting away with this." Aldridge let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, I already have." He gestured to the screens. "Do you know what makes a hunt thrilling?" Rachel clenched her fists. "The chase." He leaned closer. "The moment they realize no one is coming to save them." Her lip curled. "You're sick." Aldridge tilted his head, studying her. "And yet, you still don't understand." He pulled a gun from his holster, leveling it at her temple. "You were never meant to find the truth." A sudden bark cut through the air. Aldridge's expression barely had time to shift before Ghost launched at him, knocking the gun from his grip. Rachel wasted no time. She threw her body forward, shattering the chair against the ground. The rope snapped as she twisted free, grabbing the closest object, a metal rod. Aldridge stumbled back, roaring in pain as Ghost latched onto his arm. The door burst open. Cole stormed inside, gun raised. Two masked figures lunged at him. He fired once, striking the first. The second tackled him into the wall, knocking the weapon from his hand. Rachel swung the rod with all her strength, slamming it into the attacker's ribs. He crumpled. Aldridge staggered toward the exit. Cole was on him in seconds, slamming him into the wall. Aldridge wheezed, blood dripping from his temple. "You don't know how deep this runs." Cole yanked out his phone, shoving it into Aldridge's face. The red light blinked. Recording. Rachel's voice was cold. "Say it." Aldridge's lips curled. "I run the hunt." Cole's grip tightened. "Who else?" Aldridge spat blood onto the floor. "You'll never catch them all." Rachel stepped closer. "We don't have to." Cole pressed the phone tighter to his mouth. "We just have to expose it." The chief's expression flickered, just for a second. A sliver of fear. Rachel grabbed the gun from the floor and aimed it at his chest. "Call it in." Cole nodded. "With pleasure." By morning, the entire network was exposed. Authorities swarmed Aldridge's estate. Computers, files, security footage, evidence stacked higher than anyone could bury. The victims finally had justice. Rachel stood outside, watching as Aldridge was shoved into a squad car. Cole approached, Ghost at his side. Rachel glanced down at the dog. "I owe you a steak." Ghost huffed, nudging her arm. Cole smirked. "Make it two." Rachel let out a breath. "This town will never be the same." Cole nodded. "Maybe that's a good thing." As the last of the criminals were hauled away, one thing was clear: the hunt was over.